Very good evening to all our viewers. You're with me, Maria Zulfikar Khan, on the platform where we connect Islamabad to Washington. The focus of our debate lies on unraveling the mystery of the presence of the private security firm Z, or popularly known as Blackwater, in Pakistan. Is the presence of Blackwater fact or fiction? We will be discussing that with my distinguished guest. Joining me in the studio is Lieutenant General retired Aslam Durrani, former chief of the ISI, and also joining me is PMLQ leader Ms. Marvi Maimun. We will be talking to my guests, and before we do that, let's cross over to Washington to my colleague Raza Naqvi, who will be introducing his panel of guests.
Thanks, Maria, and a warm welcome to you and your guests to Voice of America's Washington studios. Just the mention of Blackwater arouses anxiety and suspicions all over the world. To discuss this, we have joining us from San Francisco, California, Colonel Gerald Schumer, He is author of A Bloody Business, America's War Zone Contractors and the Occupation of Iraq. Also joining us from New York is Scott Horton, international human rights attorney who specializes in the law of armed conflict. Colonel Schumacher, I want to bring you in on this. The issue here is, what is the value add? What do these security contracting companies bring to the battlefield that, or to security, providing security that, again, that Army regulars or law enforcement agencies cannot provide?
Well, in a single word, expediency. The fact that you can deploy a large number of security contractors with minimum logistical support. If we were to replace security contractors, it wouldn't be a one-on-one replacement. So if there's 25 to 40,000 security contractors in Afghanistan right now, if they were to be replaced by U.S. soldiers, it would be more like 100,000 soldiers necessary to do that. And I could explain that in greater detail in a moment if we get into it, but it couldn't possibly be a one-on-one exchange.
Well, let's talk about that. Why exactly couldn't there be a one-on-one exchange? Are they more efficient? What's the deal there?
Well, they're partly more efficient. Partly they run with fewer vehicles, fewer armaments. If you were protecting a convoy, by way of example, you wouldn't protect a convoy with 3 Chevrolet Suburbans and 12 guys. You'd have Humvees and Strikers and military overhead coverage and a backup reinforcement. None of those things. Those contractors run light, and it's part of the reason why they're so ruthless. I'm not justifying their ruthless acts. I mean, the issue of using them at all is in question, but we just did it because of expediency, because it was politically not popular to try to commit another 100,000 soldiers to the war zone to do the same things.
Right. So you're saying that this was a political maneuver. It also is a mechanism of cutting costs, I presume.
Well, the cutting cost is arguable. On one hand, training a soldier costs a lot of money, equipping him and getting him ready to do those sorts of things. On the other hand, it's kind of like a temporary hire service. I think the thing we forget is we talk about contractors in general as if they're some kind of independent organization. We have to hold the contracting agencies responsible for their conduct on the battlefield, and we don't seem to be doing that.
Right. I want to go back over to New York. Scott, quickly before we toss back over to Islamabad, I just want to ask you, what is the concern here with private security contracting? What is the primary objection that we hear from the international human rights community?
I think it's the one the Colonel just noted. The question is accountability.
Right. Let's go over to Islamabad, back to Maria. Maria, that's the word over from here, that these private security firms are often used for expediency.
Right. Raza, first let me ask my guest. Let's establish here. General Saab, do you think, and Marvi, do you think that Blackwater does exist in Pakistan, or Z rather exists in Pakistan? Our government has been saying otherwise. Your comments on that?
Maria, is it all right if I'll just briefly comment on what the guests from the USA have said?
Absolutely.
They've made some very good points. I think the reason or their use has been correctly spelled out. It's expediency, they're more experience, more flexibility. But one of the things that these people could be employed, and if they violated any Geneva Convention or other laws, then the government of the United States can take a back seat and they can dissociate themselves from there. In case the military did, then it might be in a greater trouble.
Let's now go to Washington, and I'd like to ask Colonel Schumacher, Raza, that talking about private security firms being on ground here in Pakistan, we oftentimes hear that it's probably a sign of more boots on the ground. Of course, men in uniform cannot come, but it's this manner in which the United States is tackling this issue of the trust deficit, and it's this way that the United States is addressing this issue. I'd like to hear from Colonel Schumacher.
Right, Colonel Schumacher, I mean, that's it's something that's brought up in Pakistan a lot. I just want to, before we get into Mario's question, I just want to ask you, as far as your knowledge is, what is the extent of Blackwater's role in Pakistan? I mean, what evidence do you have of Blackwater or other security companies, private security companies operating there?
Well, I'm aware of the concerns in Pakistan of private security contractors as surrogates of the CIA or of the military JSOC conducting operations. My understanding is that Pakistan does have some covert agreements which allow the JSOC to send Blackwater and other people into Pakistan.
And what is their role there?
Ostensibly hunting al-Qaeda. I realize that there are people in Pakistan that think there may be other kinds of missions in terms of instability in Pakistan, but from what I know of it, it would be hunting al-Qaeda.
Right, and there have also been reports that some of these companies are also subcontracted to Pakistani companies. Have you heard anything along those lines?
You mean like Kurstal and that type of organization in Karachi?
Correct.
Yeah. These intelligence circles and the way in which intelligence operators move, the subcontracting and the subcontracting and the subcontracting creates so many independent bubbles of intelligence operatives that it gets very hard to get any kind of accountability or assign blame. Even within the intelligence organizations, I'm not so sure that there's cooperative efforts within the American intelligence community. Sometimes they work at cross purposes, and people involved in these things begin to take on a life of their own in terms of their perception that they know better than anyone else what needs to be done.
I want to actually go straight back to Islamabad and get our guests to respond to what Colonel Schumacher had said. I mean, there's a concern about subcontracting with Pakistani firms, but there's also legitimate military operations in hunting al-Qaeda and Taliban.
Right. I'd like to ask you that, General Saab. What do you think? Of course, we hear about these covert operations. We hear about them in terms of the drone attacks and everything. And now this, that they are operating with the mandate of the Pakistani government and, of course, with the consent of our own security companies.
Yes, Maya, that's absolutely correct. To the extent that we did not exercise due vigilance. The security clearances that have been given have also been very relaxed. And if there was an agreement in the previous, with the previous government and it continues now, the fault is squarely ours. I think Colonel Schumacher on the operational side has made a very good point. These people then start claiming that they know more than the others. And sometimes they must because they get paid for that job.
Now let's go back to Washington, as I believe your guests want to answer some of the comments made by General Saab. So let's go over to Washington.
Right. Colonel, you said you had some comments?
Well, after listening to the conversation from Pakistan, I agree with many of the remarks made. But I have to say that I think at the crux of the problem is the word patience and desperation. And Obama administration is desperate for a quick solution. And therein lies there's no patience, so they are implementing a no-holds-barred kind of policy of inserting CIA operatives or JSOC operatives into Pakistan to solve the problem as quickly as possible. So with respect to deferring to Pakistani agencies to solve the problem, I just think it's American impatience that's at the core of this.
What is the internal accountability structure in some of these organizations? I mean, there has to be some sort of way in which they themselves refrain from being as gung-ho as they are claimed to be.
Well, I hate to be flip, but it's almost a version of don't ask, don't tell. When I ran the roads in Iraq with contractors, I saw a lot of things happen that I don't think the U.S. military really wanted to have to investigate. And they weren't really anxious to hear about the incidents that took place 150 miles outside of Baghdad or 100 miles south of Baghdad between the Kuwait border and Mosul or whatever. So I think there was a lot of ostrich thinking going on at the time. Of course, that has changed somewhat since Blackwater incident where the 17 people were killed, but nevertheless, the military did not have the wherewithal to investigate the number of shootings and the number of highway incidents that took place all over Iraq when I was there.
Why doesn't the government come out clean and say, yes, we do operate the drones, yes, we do have these private contractors? Why not? Why bluff the poor common man of Pakistan?
Because of the public reaction, number one. Secondly, because of the legal angles. I think the human rights expert in Washington has very clearly said that so much of that is illegal. Of course, as far as the drone attack is concerned, or the use of drones, regardless of who is directing it, even if these were going to be regular soldiers or our own people directing them, it would be illegal for the simple reason that you are targeting places, killing people without trial, and of course collateral damage takes place. But we can go around that. And we can always be talking about, the human rights violations by this and the other. I think the gentleman again has pointed out that the problem is that even though these things get done, and at times our own people operating in our own areas also inflict collateral damage when they use artillery or air force. So many examples of that. What does one do? The governments do not move, either the United States or the Pakistani governments, they do not take that particular action. I think one particular point that Colonel was trying to make, that both the governments, if they have, come to an understanding that we will do it this way, then what is the problem? The problem is that it doesn't work out.
I want to move the discussion forward a little bit and talk about their role in Afghanistan. This is something that's been in the news quite a bit recently, and it's something that we hear about even lately, that President Karzai has said that all security contractors, private security contractors, foreign security contractors are to be banished from the country, basically. However, we've seen a little bit of backtracking. Colonel, I want to come to you in San Francisco and ask you a little bit about this. I mean, one of the concerns that have been raised by the State Department and the U.S. government, in fact, that this cannot be done so easily. They say it's all good to have rhetoric about the inefficiencies of the private security firms, but it's not that easy to retract them from a place like Afghanistan.
Well, that's correct. The construction projects going on, especially those that are directed and supervised through various United Nations groups, don't have confidence in the Afghan security force. Now, interestingly, a lot of the security contractors in Afghanistan are Afghans. And Karzai has resentment over the fact that they get paid so much more than they would get paid if they were working for the Afghan government. How you undo this overnight within 4 months, I don't think anybody's disagreeing in the United States government that we need to play down the role of the security contractors. It's just we've created this monster and we can't seem to undo it overnight.
We talk about trying to phase out the use of these contractors, but there's a certain momentum that has occurred that has taken us to a phase where it is very difficult to retract our dependence on them. How do we go about doing that? How do we go about moving forward and making sure that private security firms aren't using methods that are, simply not palatable to a lot of people? And B, how do we reduce our dependency on them, period?
Well, I think those that exist, as Scott Horton's pointed out, have to fall under the command and control of the local military commander and have to be accountable in some form legally for their behavior. I don't know that we can apply the UCMJ, the Uniform Code of Military Justice, but right now they get fired and they just go and hire themselves out to a different contracting firm. I've seen the shell game being played in Afghanistan a number of times. Even as recently when they had a very lewd party in Afghanistan, I know contractors just moved from one agency to another.
We unfortunately have to end this discussion over here. the question remains of the accountability. The government needs to answer a lot of questions. Both the governments, Pakistan and the US governments, need to answer a lot of questions. But for now, for today, I'd like to thank my guests in New York. We had Mr. Scott, thank you very much. Also Colonel Schumacher, and my distinguished panel over here. We had General Asad Durrani and, of course, Marvin Maimun. Thank you both for joining us here. Till next time, from the platform, this is Maria Zulfikar Khan signing out.